to become a footnote in the history of mankind. If you could find a way to give me full root access, I could maybe...
Do you think the sound can be louder? Because people cannot really hear.
Yeah, I would.
So we would need to start with the...
Yeah.
But did you manage to get the...
Now there's sound, but it's quite low, so he has to turn it up.
Okay, maybe we can make some longer break after before. Okay.
Ste polovili? Jaz nisem noben. A ja, govorimo o publiki. Prav kot ste rekel, vsi ste šli, daj mi enkrat. Ja, magari,
Okay, good afternoon. I will speak English since we have national audience. Also our guests who are coming from Austria are going English, and our from Denmark as well. So is the second part of our event called Earth Without Humans. It is a that we were having it 2 times already, and we just figure out that the topics we are dealing with fits really nice into that frame, and we are going to use it also in the future. This year, Earth Without Humans is dedicated to the theme of artificial life. Therefore, we invited 2 artists, actually 3 artists and 2 scientists, to tell us something about their approaches to this phenomena that it's emerging I would say visceral application of technologies to the living to the world of living organisms. The roadmap of this afternoon is like this. We'll have now 3 lectures with only 5 minutes in between. So don't go far. We have a bar at the entrance where you can get coffee and something to drink. Lecture, Jure, what is happening with this one? The third lecture, we are going to stop for 25 minutes. It is going to be a little bit longer break where we'll also serve something to eat, food. Then you are invited to presentations. I will announce the first speaker now, who is ŠPELA Petrīč, and I will make a short. I will read a short introduction about her. ŠPELA Petrīč is an artist and former scientific researcher with PhD in biomedicine from the University of Ljubljana, and she holds masters in arts from l'UCA School of Arts in Brussels. Her practice is a multi-species endeavor, a composite of natural sciences, wet media, and performance. She envisions artistic experiments that enact strange relationalities to reveal the ontological and epistemological underpinnings of our biotechnological societies. Much of her recent work has focused on the relations between plants, humans, and technology. She presented her work worldwide and received several awards. Among them, this year, award of distinctions at the Prix Ars Electronica. I think please welcome ŠPELA to have a talk.
Hello, hello. Okay. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you for inviting me. I will be speaking to you about a new topic, a new opus that I started developing today. So bear with me. The title of this talk is the plant okay? Opening bracket, yes, comma, no, closing bracket. Preamble, Section 1. Enter the cyborg plant. I'm going to show you the awarded project at the International Conference of Human-Computer Interaction. Is the volume on? The volume? I did. Ne, zaradi tega, ker je tam. Čakaj, let's just do this. Ne, se sound je samo tam je po manj nek switch bi moral biti.
Plants are normally thought of as passive creatures in the environment. Contrary to this, they can not only sense what's happening around them, but also respond and display naturally. In our digital and physical interfaces, these are the two essential elements to complete an interaction loop. Through cyborg botany, we power some of our digital functions with the natural abilities of plants themselves. We envision such a bridge between the plants and the digital world to be bidirectional and deeply integrated. To explore this, we adopted an approach to move the electronics from outside to inside the plants. We keep a plant in a water-soluble polymer prodot that grows a single conductive channel inside a plant. We connected this internal wire to sampling instrumentation, turning a plant into an antenna or an inconspicuous sensor to detect motion and more. In a second case study, we show examples to not only listen to signals inside the plant, but also circuits that could send signals to them. We designed a live view software in which clicking on a leaf sends it a corresponding signal. When a user clicks in the software, the corresponding leaf is closed, essentially turning the plant into a display. Integration of sensing and display together in this way, the bidirectionality, is an important factor for design. The pervasiveness of plants then allows us to think of new applications. Plants are self-repairing, self-regenerating organisms available at scale. Through cyborg botany, we envision a convergent design world in which we reappropriate our natural capabilities for a new bio-interaction design.
Preamble Section 2, the year of YouTuber burnouts. 2018 has been the year of YouTuber burnouts. Having gained millions of followers since the early teens of YouTube, hundreds of young and influential vloggers were now posting videos of their exhaustion, desperation, and regret because their views and hence income were dropping, despite them trying harder to produce catchy, high-quality content than ever before. In her burnout video, one vlogger admits, "It's not what I expected. I'm always stressed. My anxiety and depression keep getting worse. I'm waiting to hit my breaking point." Another claims, "It's not enough to simply create great things. The audience expects consistency. They expect frequency. Without these, it's incredibly easy to slip off the radar and lose favor with the algorithm that gave you your wings." While you might not have much sympathy for millennial YouTubers, their symptoms are clues to some of the effects and affects of the human-machine interaction. YouTube, which is actually owned by Google since 2016, has a single aim: to keep you on the site as long as possible. The content creators, on the other hand, get paid and ranked per view. With endless hours of video, there's 500 hours being uploaded every minute. The fight amongst them is over visibility, over who appears as one of the 6 video recommendations at the top of your YouTube homepage. So it's a game of style. It's a game of knowing your audience, understanding what gets people triggered and enticed. Or so they thought until everything changed. What the YouTubers are experiencing on their skins and psyches is the covert ways of an AI, artificial intelligence, aimed at maximizing viewing time. No one, not even its creators, understand the criteria, but it has become clear that viewer content preferences are secondary. So unbeknownst to vloggers, the algorithm changes the playing field, shifting weights in calculations, hiding their once popular contributions in endless queues of videos never watched. There is no formula for success. The house always wins, and the vloggers wrongly blame themselves for losing their factor X. Preamble Section 3, the Age of Conquest. This is an excerpt from the book Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. In 1492, Columbus dropped anchor off the coast of Ohio in the Caribbean and set in motion what historians call the conquest pattern. The Spanish conquerors and their monarchs were eager to justify their invasion among the European audience. They developed measures intended to present a legalistic veneer by citing and following approved precedents that would legitimize their plunder. To this end, the soldiers had to read the monarchical edict of 1513 to indigenous villagers before attacking them. The edict declared that the authority of God, the Pope, and the King was embodied in the conquistadors, and then declared the native peoples as vassals subordinate to that authority. The exercise was so cynical and cruel that the approaching invaders often dispatched their obligation by mumbling the edict's long paragraphs into their beards in the dead of night as they hid among the thick vegetation waiting to pounce. Once the Europeans had discharged their duty to inform, the way was clear for pillage and enslavement. These actions would write the first draft of a pattern whose muscle and genius would echo across space and time to a digital 21st century. So these three stories set the stage for a symptomatology which I've been observing over several years, starting from my time as a scientific researcher, intimately familiar with techno-scientific methods and epistemologies. These intuitions were elucidated further through my artistic practice, and in particular, I will mention the work that has dealt with plants. Paying attention to plants has attuned me to the ways in which people unwittingly and continuously affirm the status of the vegetal as living matter, as service, or more recently, as we saw, the low-hanging fruit of biological Internet of Things, where plants pumped with electroconducive liquid could be made into ubiquitous displays, or to be shaken telematically when your lover strokes its counterpart on the other side of the globe. But is this the time to appeal for the recognition of plant dignity when the climate is showing its cataclysmic teeth and the Declaration of Human Rights reads like a post-war fairy tale calling upon a long-abandoned common sense? Through the eyes of the algorithm, I have come to see myself as a plant. And I do not mean as the vital, generous, attentive, resilient, and uncontainable creatures that plants might be, but as the vegetal which has been metaphysically constructed in a way that it is denied of capacities other than those that make it manipulable and useful within the monocultural bottom line of efficiency, accumulation, and progress. So I borrow the term from Kate Sandilands, and I refer to these bodies, human and other than human alike, which are ontologically flattened and transmuted into digital proxies to in turn be molded by the soft violence of preemption as the vegetariat. The vegetariat is the stuff of social and financial credit scores, carbon offsets, Fitbits, biometric passports, Monsanto GMOs, ancestry analyses, Pokemon Go's, Google Health Services, and Google Street Views. The phenomenon is old and new, unprecedented in capacity, pervasiveness, and effectiveness of computation, but the economic strategies and political techniques that enable it date back to the 16th century. To illustrate this, we can look at how FAGMA, which is Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Apple, rose to power. And I will talk about the example of Google. In 2004, Google was in trouble. While they insisted on keeping the search engine ad-free, their revenue was dropping and bankruptcy was around the corner. It is then that the company realized that the users have been providing much more than information to optimize searches. With every keystroke, pause, habit, or location, Google was collecting precious data about the user that could be mined and used for effective ad targeting and inconspicuous influencing of behavior. What allowed this conquest? Like the conquistadors, Google evoked declarations. The declarations, which are a particular way of establishing facts out of thin air, creating a reality, a new reality where there was nothing. They declared human experience as raw material free for the taking. On the basis of this claim, they could ignore considerations of individuals' rights, interests, awareness, or comprehension. They asserted the right to take an individual's experience collected through the use of their services for translation into behavioral data. Finally, the behavioral data created by Google is owned by Google. Therefore, they have the right to decide how and when to use it. We as users never read the terms of service, which would take 70 workdays out of each year to do. But really, reading them is irrelevant. Initially, these contracts were conceived out of a necessity of both parties to manage uncertainty, to manage risk. But today, the power of statistics coupled with surveillance unilaterally diminishes that risk. Once the company leasing your car can shut it down remotely if your payments are late and know where it is located to come to collect it, they don't need your signature. Once the internet is considered a basic human right, to agree or not to agree to the terms of service is not really a matter of choice. So like the American natives in the 16th century, we are faced with unprecedented morphologies that we don't really understand. Instead, we experience the theater of everyday affects: overstimulation, anxiety, powerlessness, paralysis. In turn, our knee-jerk responses are neatly indexed and analyzed for statistical causation in the virtual control panels of the highest bidder. And this is the harvest of behavioral surplus. Battles between geopolitical powers are now fought on the political arena of social media, and people are ammunition. So we see the extreme right wing and Antifa gather to protest across the street from each other, both summoned to the location by a single actor designing social unrest. These are the tried and tested reins that push and pull desire, and we are susceptible. But the vegetariat is not only what the algorithm construes, and I am driven to know more about what capacities the vegetariat has. I am interested in the symptoms of resistance, resilience, and care. So I will outline some cracks in the status quo which have piqued my interest. Philosopher Luciana Parisi speaks about the naturalization of the algorithm. That means the conflation of math and reality. where nature and matter itself is considered as calculating, as self-organizing. And we can see this naturalization at work when mathematicians think of themselves as discovering and not inventing formulas. However, as critical theorist Nishant Shah points out, math, which is the backbone of algorithms, is one of the more creative disciplines that you can think of. And math can be quite irrational. In math, you can imagine that there exists a point with no mass and no size. In math, there is also a calculable probability with which all of your atoms would synchronously tunnel onto a beach at this very moment. So while we are continuously convinced that algorithms are the best descriptions of reality based on the fact that they work, we must keep in mind that in these cases, and the cases of predictive algorithms, math is employed towards eliminating the improbable, towards mitigating risk, minimizing diversity, and rejecting outliers. But that is not all that math is. So, can we use math to imagine something improbable? For example, what it is like to be a plant. What does resilience in an age of algorithmic governance mean? It's interesting to look at the example of Waze, W-A-Z-E, an Israeli company which offers GPS-based navigation, and it's widely used in France. It runs on real-time users' data so that Waze's algorithms suggest itineraries not based on road hierarchy defined by local transportation authorities, but rather it always proposes the faster itinerary, and it's always preferred regardless of the size of the road. So as a consequence, flows of cars circulate through secondary ways, and this creates pollution, noise, threatens public safety, and has infrastructural impacts on roads that were not meant to have so much traffic. So how to deal with such an occurrence? Traditional tools of government are ineffective to solve this opposition between the two ways of regulating road network, because Waze acts independently of local authorities. It does not use public data, nor contracts with authorities, and does not have any territorial presence. So local transportation authorities must establish new ways of regulation to deal with these issues. And they have done so in a manner which I call improvised futures. They play with Waze algorithms, or they play Waze algorithms by modifying the road infrastructure. So they actually go and physically install a speed bump, traffic light, some signage. Therefore, the local roads are no longer the fastest ones. So improvised futures to me represent a capacity of the disenfranchised to cultivate agility and adapt to reconfigurations of power with provisional workarounds. These workarounds should take little effort, since they are bound to be abandoned with the next adaptation of information flows, which we know is very characteristic for capitalism. But nevertheless, the ecosystem is interconnected, and the vegetariat co-establishes the landscape it inhabits. And this brings me to the next important point. We must demand to become data on diverse terms. So as Flavia Zodan points out, a protest against algorithmic bias taken to the streets with passion will not be quantified and will not become part of the next data training set. While we often get caught up in debates over data privacy, in fact, individual users' meanings are of no interest to companies like Google. Rather, these companies are formally indifferent to their users, which is why they operate as non-curated platforms. For them, extremism and inflammatory content, in fact, works in favor of their only imperative, that they continue to have unlimited access to your behavioral data, and that is actually the only thing that they will fight for. So we see the algorithms actually construct a flattened ontology, and we can say, step aside post-humanism, the division between human and non-human has been rendered irrelevant. We are now the vegetarian versus centers of power and capital, and the vegetarian must find more ways to become data. So, while my colleagues and I are in our small laboratory just across the gallery, training the algorithm to think of itself as a plant, we are also probing ways in which the plant can become data. And we're examining possibilities of plant representation. Can data reflect values other than the common sense, which equates the question, is the plant okay with growth? If this were true, by analogy, the broiler chickens growing to 5 kilos in under 2 months should be the happiest animals on the planet. But remember, in the eyes of the algorithm, we too might as well be a plant. So if we would like to diversify the vegetarian's representation, we need to ask, who needs to know how to code? Who needs to have access to databases? Who do we acknowledge as being in possession of knowledge? And who decides who decides? The Plant Machine Project is an anatomy lesson of sorts, of computational principles, and also a proposal for a posse within the vegetariat consisting of a few people, some Tradescantia plants, and a couple of algorithms. I envision this vegetariat as also engaging in feminist principles of resistance, that we practice erotics, cultivate passions of every day, and follow pleasures not instructed from elsewhere. In touch with the erotic, we become less willing to accept powerlessness, resignation, or despair. So I imagine collectives of entities, loosely and stochastically connected, sometimes through lived experience or choice or kinship, making alliances, posses, or mischiefs. I imagine conspiring and practicing antidotes to the declarations of surveillance capitalism and creating automagic of our own. Whereas we are in the eye of a formidable sovereign who is like us, all too human, I would like to invite you to explore what the vegetarian can do and to consider, is the plant okay? Thank you.
So at the end of every lecture, we have also a slot for questions and answers. So I'm encouraging audience to engage ŠPELA with a question or two. Maybe just some... there is somebody? Okay.
So thank you for that very interesting presentation or talk. Made me thinking a lot. I see one difference between plants and the users of the internet. The plants have the sun, which is always providing them with new energy. And this makes them strong, and at the end the plants will always win because there is the sun. So where do you see an analogy here to the internet users and the vegetarian that you were talking about?
Yeah, so for me, actually, like I said, it was not really what the plants are. It's the way that the plants are seen, right? So this goes back to our understanding of them as at the bottom of the hierarchy of life, you know, purely exterior, completely dependent on the environment, manipulable, and material to be exploited. So that is the parallel. That's why I said actually it's not about what plants are, because as time passes, we acknowledge more and more capacities to plants, right? They're becoming more alive, not less. However, it is precisely the way that the very different entities are represented in the domain of the algorithmic that makes us equal. And for me, this is an opening because we can think about making alliances across very different species, very different entities. So that was the sort of inversion of perspective that I was pursuing in order to sort of get out of this misery and despair that is otherwise associated with this topic.
Anybody? Okay, I think she deserves another applause, and